time. We so appreciate all the work that you're doing in Washington, and we understand you were markups to 5:30 this morning, and so we're even more grateful that you're here with us tonight. So I do want to just welcome everybody and give a shout out to Miriam Hall and the Bow and Dumbarton Democrats for sending a Democrat to the State House. Yay, it just proves that we can do this, we can make this happen, and just really inspired by that. Just a few housekeeping things regarding Zoom. We are recording this meeting tonight. If that's not something that you are comfortable with, now's the time to give a wave and head off. But it does mean that it will be available for people to view who aren't able to be with us tonight. We suggest that you put your view option on speaker view. That way you'll get a better sense when the speaker is on deck. We would welcome questions in the chat, and I'll be monitoring those. We'll do a few questions after Congressman Pappas has finished speaking, and then we'll hold the rest of the questions to the end of the program. We would ask everyone at this point to mute themselves. And also, again, please do identify yourself. If go to the three dots and name yourself, so that we have a sense of who's joining us tonight. All are absolutely welcome, but it's nice to have a sense of who's in the room with us. So with that, I will turn it over to our Master of Ceremonies, Carrie Claflin. And Carrie is a historian and a scholar, a PhD historian and scholar, and she is Kent Street Coalition's resident expert on all things voting rights. And we are so lucky to have her as part of our work here. She is a tireless champion in the fight for democracy, and just so thrilled to have her here tonight, and want to thank Carrie ahead of time, because this was Carrie put this program together, and I think it's on it's the foundation of all the work that we do together, voting rights, and so I'm really grateful for that. So Carrie, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Louise. That's awfully nice. Good evening, everyone. It is really so nice to see you all, and thank you for coming. As Louise said, I'm Carrie Claflin. I'm in the Voting Rights Working Group, and I'm really honored to be able to moderate this program that we've called Democracy in the Balance: Why We Need the For the People Act. I suspect many of you are here for the same reason I am, because our democracy is in the ICU, or so it seems. Our country is in a period that historians say rivals the post-Reconstruction era of Jim Crow. That's right. And as you know, state legislatures are hard at work destroying the concept of one person, one vote. And as the title of Carol Anderson's book suggests, it might be, is we are moving toward one person, no vote. I have to remind myself that every step we've taken toward progress in our nation's history has been met with resistance. And I'm thinking ending slavery, every advancement in voting rights, marriage equality, just to name a few. Just as we have fought throughout our history for our freedom to vote, we are fighting now to ensure Americans are able to cast our vote and have it counted. And we have seen that people of good conscience will rise against any challenge to claim the freedom that is our right. As if to underscore this spirit of determination that I'm trying to convey to you, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, has just called the floor vote on the For the People Act to be held on June 23rd. So it's gonna happen, and it's coming up. We are very fortunate tonight to have an amazing group of speakers to talk to us about what is possibly the most effective remedy for what ails our democracy, the For the People Act. It's also called HR1 and S1. You might hear them referred to interchangeably. We will first hear from Congressman Chris Pappas. Being mindful of the Congressman's time constraints, we will take questions for him, as Louise just said, at the end of his remarks. But for the next two panels, the second panel with the Honorable Melanie Levesque and Representative David Cody, and the third panel with Kelsey Clementowitz and Lucas Meyer, we will save all those questions for those two panels till the end of the third panel. So Congressman Chris Pappas, thank you so much for coming. Congressman Pappas represents New Hampshire's 1st district, and he has been a friend of Kent Street since our founding just after the 2016 election. Before he was elected to Congress, he served as a member of the New Hampshire Executive Council. As a representative who has been so involved in his community, the Congressman understands how essential it is to ensure that everyone's voices are heard. This is one of the reasons he co-sponsored the For the People Act from the beginning. The Congressman knows that the best way to put power in the hands of everyday Americans is to limit the influence of special interests, big corporations, and billionaires in our politics. That's why End Citizens United has endorsed him for the 2022 cycle. It is my great pleasure to welcome Congressman Chris Pappas.
Well, thank you so much, Kiri. I want to thank you, Louise, everyone at Kent Street for all the work that you do. It has been an amazing, just sort of run for you guys as you have, taken deep concern that you all had for our country, our future, our democracy after the 2016 election and turned it into positive, constructive action. And that is so important. We know that elections are certainly important, but also the work we do in between is so impactful at helping to shape policies and holding our leaders accountable. And we have so many reasons to be holding folks accountable in Concord and in Washington these days. And so I wish you all the best of luck with the work that you're doing. And I'm really appreciative that you're giving some space to the issue of protecting our democracy. This is a keystone issue. It's something we have to get right. And as we see all across the country, literally 389 restrictive bills that would make it harder to vote, that would take away voting rights from individuals, have been proposed in state legislatures. We know that this moment requires us to push back and to be doing all we can to advocate for good policies that are going to ensure that we have a democracy that is truly a level playing field where everyone's voice can be heard. I also want to thank David and Melanie for the work that you do. And I know you'll all be hearing from them in a few moments, but they are subject matter experts. They've been working on these issues for a number of years, and I'm glad they're here to share their perspective. And I just want to mention as well, the victory in Bow and Dunbarton on Tuesday, I think that is a really terrific win because it does show that folks are engaged. They are watching what's happening in Concord right now. And as so many of us are concerned about the right-wing legislation that we see being passed in the House and Senate and potentially signed into law by the governor, we know the people of New Hampshire are watching. And I think that helped in large part fuel the great turnout that we saw on Tuesday. And I want to also thank my friend Wendy Thomas, who I see there too, fought a good fight in a special election in Merrimack. And I know we haven't seen the last of Wendy. Thanks for all that you do. But really, I've been a supporter and a co-sponsor of HR1 since I was first elected to Congress. And, I didn't run to become a part of a broken system in Washington. I ran to try to change the way Washington works. One of the frustrating things for so many of us still today is that we have issues that are wildly popular among the American people. Take the issue of gun violence and background checks. 90% of the American people supports it. But we have entrenched interests in Washington that prevent that bill from getting passed. Take any other issue, the prescription drug issue, for instance. I have a Republican super PAC that's already running ads against me because I want to, believe it or not, allow Medicare to negotiate cheaper drug prices with the pharmaceutical companies. And they, for too long, have held us back from passing that sensible policy to help people get life-saving medications and save the American people money. This has got to be about the American people and how we translate the will of the American people into good policies and be able to move this country forward, how we make sure that everyone can participate. And so HR1, the For the People Act, or S1 as it's called in the Senate, is a really foundational bill. And you should think of it as a stool that has three legs. There are the provisions that deal with making it easier and not harder to vote, talking about removing barriers for elections, adopting things like early voting periods in federal elections, automatic voter registration. We saw in New Hampshire, for instance, last fall, where we were able to modify for COVID our absentee voting in the state and had a no excuse absentee voting for COVID. That went extraordinarily well. And we had a record-breaking turnout, and people appreciated the opportunity to have a choice about how they voted. And so we shouldn't fall into the trap of believing the argument that somehow by making it easier to vote, that you cheapen democracy. We need everyone's voice and everyone's vote, whether they agree with us or not. That's how we reflect the values of this country and the will of the American people. And so, especially as we view this effort all across the country to try to restrict voting, to try to make it harder to vote, we really need this bill to help ensure that we're moving in the right direction. In addition to that, a second leg of the stool is stopping the influence that big money has in our political system. And I talked a little bit about this before, just how big corporate money, especially the dark money that flows into campaigns, distorts our elections, helps pick winners and losers and override the votes and voices of the American people. And so this would adopt some new transparency guidelines for the funding of our campaigns in these super PACs. It would prevent foreign money from getting into our elections. And we know we've seen the evidence of that happening. We need to do all we can to mitigate the impacts of the Citizens United decision, which have been so corrosive at just exploding the amount of outside money that's spent on our campaigns. We think that we should be empowering candidates who are speaking directly to the American people, who are raising money in small increments. And that's why there's a small dollar donor matching program as part of HR1. It's funded, by the way, not through taxpayer dollars, but by fines that are levied on corporate lawbreakers. So these are, corporations that are committing fraud or malfeasance or breaking the law. They're going to help right the ship of our democracy and make sure that it's in the hands of ordinary Americans, and that anyone with good ideas who might not have some big wealthy backers should be able to run for office and be a part of our democratic system too. Another important leg of the stool is fighting corruption and making sure that we are drawing a bright line between members of Congress and lobbyists, that we're doing all we can to put some teeth into our ethics rules. These steps are absolutely essential to make sure that we can truly have trust in our government and that our elected officials are working for us and not working for themselves. So these provisions are wildly popular. They are supported on a bipartisan basis. Opinion surveys have shown strong support for some of the provisions that I mentioned. And you have to wonder why we are hearing so much negative messaging about the bill and why there are so many mistruths and fallacies out there about the For the People Act. Well, it's because some very powerful special interests, including the Koch brothers network, groups like Heritage Action Fund, have discovered that, yes, this is a popular bill. It is widely supported by both Republicans, Democrats, and independents too. And they're concerned that it's going to erode the power and control they have over the electorate and our elected officials. And so they've come into states like New Hampshire with these lies. They have gone to states like Iowa. And I was just on a caucus call with my colleague, Cindy Axne, who's a Democratic member of Congress from Iowa. And she was talking about how the Heritage Action Fund, worked with the Iowa legislature to pass restrictive voting laws to ensure that there were voter purges that happened. They actually made it illegal to send someone an absentee ballot application, just an application, that's now illegal in Iowa. And that was done in concert with these right-wing groups, including Heritage. So it's something we have to fully understand, that we have kind of awoken a beast here. People that like the system just the way it is, like the fact that corporations have outsized influence, and like the fact that they can dominate the policy outcomes in Washington, D.C. And we have to continue to work to get the message out. I think, as Kiri said, it's a good sign that Chuck Schumer has called a vote on the For the People Act for the end of June. I know there's a lot of frustration and kind of bewilderment about the position Joe Manchin has been taking and the op-ed that he wrote recently. But look, I think at least for the time being, we got to give him the benefit of the doubt as he has conversations with Republicans. And we hope that since he co-sponsored the bill 2 years ago, when push comes to shove, he's going to be there on the side of the American people and do the right thing. So I hope this will continue to move in the right direction. We've already passed it through the House. I should also add that there's another critical voting rights bill that we have to pass, and that's the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We know that the Supreme Court struck down provisions of the Voting Rights Act a few years ago. There, again, is another bill that's wildly popular. Used to pass, by the way, with unanimous support. It did it during the Bush administration, the last time the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized. And we need both of these bills together. They are not, sort of an either-or proposition, because HR1 is going to, look at these restrictive laws that are being passed today. It's going to look at the big money in our campaign finance system. It's going to look at groups like, the disabled community and students, and make sure that they're treated fairly when it comes to our election laws. HR4, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, we should think of as prospective. It's what happens after we have that on the books, especially when it comes to the pre-clearance requirements that we hope to be able to pass as part of it, to look at some of these states that have a record of discriminatory voting practices, and to make sure that our Department of Justice is equipped to be able to shut those practices down, or any attempts that might violate the spirit of that law. So these are two things that you'll hear a lot about, I think, as we move forward. And doing one is great, but we really need both. And we're going to continue to fight for that. Now, we haven't actually passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act yet in the House. I think they're still finalizing the language and making sure that it's in the right place to pass constitutional muster. But we expect to see it and expect that it will pass over the next few weeks. So I just want to thank you once again for having a great deal of interest in this. If you're like me, you think every day about what we have seen over the last few years. This is not the country that we long knew. And I think the norms and the conventions have been challenged, especially with the rise of Donald Trump. I know we saw that on full display in the Capitol building with the insurrection that he helped launch, that really came within a few seconds of potentially stopping the peaceful transfer of power, of harming elected officials, including the Speaker of the House and the Vice President, and others who were there to carry out the people's business and to certify the election results. The fact that after that transpired, we had 150 of my colleagues in the House vote to take away the Electoral College votes from several states. The fact that just a few weeks ago, we couldn't get the bipartisan votes that we needed in the Senate to be able to fully understand the events of January 6th and have a sort of a dispassionate look at that incident through a 9/11 style commission. The Republicans wouldn't support it. So we can't just expect that things are going to continue to move in an appropriate direction for US democracy. We have to fight to keep it. I think back to the Constitutional Convention when someone asked Ben Franklin what kind of government we had, and he said, "A republic if you can keep it." And that is our job and our charge. We are the keepers of our democratic republic. It's being tested today like at no time in recent memory. And we have to both work to pass pieces of legislation that can shore it up and work in our communities and in our circles to make sure people understand the stakes and are involved in this effort too. So I just want to thank you for providing a forum for this and for all the work that you do. And we look forward to any thoughts and questions that you have.
Thank you, Congressman. We're so appreciative of your advocacy for HR1 and HR4 and your insights tonight. And so glad you brought up the overwhelming popularity of these two bills, in fact, and that how the elected leaders who are fighting these reforms are really going against the will of the people, and can't just allow that to go by. So there seem to be a lot of questions in the chat. Louise, have you been monitoring those?
Yes, I've been monitoring those. Thank you again, Congressman. I think one of the big questions we all have, given that Senator Manchin came out this week talking about, saying with his op-ed saying that he would not currently support the For the People Act. We're just wondering how we can do appropriate outreach to Manchin, and wondering if there are any Republicans either in the House or the Senate who you see as allies and people that might be perhaps reach out and help to recognize the need for this kind of legislation. So Janet Ward had raised the question, and I think it's one that's all on all of our minds. Thanks.
Well, I'm glad we're thinking about it. And I do think that it's important that our senators, hear from us as well. And I know that they are either co-sponsors of the legislation or certainly are helping to champion it. But, as they get feedback from constituents, it's important for them to hear the true voice of the people of this state and to know, where you all stand. So I don't think that's something that you should ignore either. I know that when we look at the messages that come into our office, we track that very closely in terms of what we're hearing from people back home. So that's critically important, and certainly encouraging friends in other states to reach out. If we know people in Maine, it's always a good thing to have people reach out to Senator Collins in particular, as well as Senator King, who's an independent and who needs to be hearing from his constituents too. So I think this is really important. And once again, look, we're gonna have to have the Senate do the right thing when it comes to moving forward with a process that allows this bill to be considered. And also to ensure that there aren't procedural roadblocks that are put up. Why should something like a filibuster, which is purported to protect the rights of the majority, stand in the way of, protect the rights of the minority, stand in the way of protecting the rights of every American to participate in their democracy? So I think the democracy legislation that I talked about is in a category of its own. And I think we have to make sure we're making the argument that there are some things that are just so foundational. If you can get 50 votes for a Supreme Court justice, I think you should also get 50 votes to be able to pass something as fundamental as how we shore up our democracy, how we end the influence of big money, and make sure we have a government we can be proud of.
Yeah, and I guess if there are other ideas about how we might best help you in your work on this and our entire congressional delegation, are there things that you would look to us to do that would help?
Well, I think what's really
their
important
advocacy.
now, and I think this is probably part of the reason for the conversation is we're hearing a lot of negative messaging, and it's very well organized. And so how do we understand what's fact and fiction, and why this legislation is important? And so I think helping to get the word out to your networks, to the people of New Hampshire about this bill is going to be important to make sure that it stays at the level of support that it already enjoys, and that it doesn't fall victim to the sort of negative messaging that is at work here in so many other places. So I think, letters to the editor, op-eds, and just keeping this out there as a top priority is going to be really important to make sure that we can withstand the assault that's already coming from the super PACs and other groups that want to stop it dead in its tracks.
And one of the questions we often hear, it's not one that was in the chat, but that people say, well, why should I contact, Congressman Pappas' office or Senator Shaheen's office if I know they're already supporting the bill? But I've heard that that's helpful because it allows you to say, look, I'm hearing from people back home about this, and counters whatever other messaging that you may be getting. Do you find that that is helpful?
I think it is helpful. And look, I would imagine that, Senator Shaheen is probably running into Joe Manchin a lot these days. And wouldn't it be great if she were able to say to him, I had thousands of people contact my office this week about HR1, and there's a lot of support for it in New Hampshire. So I think, colleagues talk to one another, and, our office is always, really interested to see what's on people's mind, and it allows us to engage with folks back home on a variety of issues. But I think it does help shape the direction of things in Washington. We saw that certainly over the last 4 years, at pivotal moments like when the ACA was hanging in the balance and, came down to one vote in the Senate. People were mobilized and they jammed the switchboards. And I think we need something like that today to make sure that, our democracy is safe.
Right. That sounds great. I completely agree with you. So thank you. Carrie, did you have questions that you were looking at?
No, I'm just really happy to be inspired by what the congressman has been talking about tonight, because you're an optimistic person and you make things seem possible. And I think it's really, I'm so glad that you brought up that our delegation should hear from us, so that you need our support verbally and loudly. And the misinformation is a big problem. Here in New Hampshire, it's a big problem. So I think that that's one of our the things that we will do going forward, is to continue to tackle the misinformation and get out the right information.
And one of the questions that's kind of a theme that's come up in the chat is, the appropriate role for the federal government in elections. And as we know, much of that is reserved to the states, but with the caveat that Congress can pass regulations that impact elections. And we've seen the importance of that over the course of our history in order to make sure that people have fair access to the ballot box. I'm just wondering if you, Congressman, could speak at all to the issue of the federal role in elections, and why this bill addresses that and why that's appropriate.
Sure. Well, the Constitution's pretty clear about, there being certainly a state role in carrying out elections and determining the time and manner of elections. But beyond that the federal government also has a role in it too. And if you look at some of the successive amendments that dealt with expanding voting rights, whether it was to former slaves or to people under the age of 21 who were granted the right to vote recently. Congress is charged with being able to pass legislation to make sure that those rights are not abridged. And our country, if you look back over a long period of time, we had a reckoning with the passing of civil rights laws in the 1960s that were necessary to help move this country forward and to help address restrictive laws that states were passing, both in terms of voting, but in so many other aspects of our life. So this is what federalism, is about. And we're talking about having a functioning democracy that is not just a state by state or city by city issue, that should be an American priority that we can all get behind. And once again, we're not talking about anything that is either unpopular or isn't sort of regarded as best practices that happen in many states across the country, including some things that happen here, like same-day registration. So I think that this is groundbreaking legislation. It's within the purview of Congress to consider and pass it. There is historic precedent for the way that we have taken on restrictive laws that states have passed. And I think the timing of this is so crucial for us because we just know that the other side and the big money groups that are behind them want to perpetuate a system where the playing field is not level. And I think it's plain for most Americans to see that that's exactly the case.
And we know that Shelby really undermined, the decision in Shelby really undermined the Voting Rights Act, and that we have HR4 in honor of John Lewis, who is one of the greats when it comes to voting rights. Can you talk a little bit about why HR4 is necessary and what it seeks to accomplish? And there was some questions about, pre-clearance, and I think there's some misunderstandings about what that means. I mean, basically, it's trying to make sure that laws that are being passed are not in conflict with people's fundamental constitutional rights. But I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to HR4. I know you did talk about it in your general remarks, but.
Sure. And John Lewis, by the way, was a huge supporter and champion of for the People Act HR1. He actually had a hand in crafting, a great deal of the language that's contained in the bill. And he would be proud that we're picking up this banner and continuing to run with it. And, the Voting Rights Act, as you mentioned in the Shelby versus Holder case, was dismantled in a very concerning way, especially dealing with the pre-clearance issue that you brought up. And so it's important to reestablish that, to do it in a way that can pass constitutional muster. And that's why it's taking some time, I think, to finalize the language. But that, again, applies prospectively to laws that may be passed in certain jurisdictions that have a history, a clear, well-documented history of discrimination. And so, it's just a bedrock law that, once again, we need to make sure is on the books so that it can fully protect communities of color in, states across our country. As we think of this as a redistricting year, one of the other elements I didn't mention with respect to HR1 is the issue of gerrymandering and the requirement that states have an independent commission that's removed from the political decision makers to help make recommendations about fair maps and to help set certain standards for how districts are drawn. That's so essential as we think about what the next 10 years looks like in this country. And we know that gerrymandering is a race to the bottom. It's one of the reasons why we have, a lot of members that don't have to worry about re-election in Washington who make a lot of headlines. You think of someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's got a pretty easy district she set up to win again. So I think that speaks to how gerrymandering doesn't produce the kind of serious lawmakers that we need that, ultimately, think about the broad spectrum of the electorate that they represent back home. But that's important both in terms of HR1 as well as the Voting Rights Act, and making sure that districts that would seek to dilute the power of minority groups in this country, passing that soon would potentially help head off and provide a vehicle to challenge some of these, district lines.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you addressed that specifically. I know it's a, top of the agenda issue here in New Hampshire. So I'm going to thank you, but I'm going to turn it back over to Kiri. We're so grateful to have you here, and your leadership on this and so much else is just so greatly appreciated, Congressman. And we're really thankful that you took the time to be with us tonight. It's and you gave us a lot of really great information. So thank you.
Well, happy
Thank
to
you.
do it. Yeah, thanks very much for your time. It was nice to see you all. Thank you all for your work as well. And we look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much. It's always great to have you back at Kent Street. And we really appreciate how hard you're working for us all when you're in Washington. So thank you again.
All right. Well, take care, everyone. We'll see you soon. Next time, I'll bring the chicken tenders.
Oh, coconut.
Okay.
Ooh.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to our second panel now. That was so great. It's just always wonderful to hear from Congressman Pappas. He's wonderful, and I just will quickly, sorry, I keep talking, to underscore one thing he said is that the reforms in the For the People Act are not radical. They're not new. They're just new to New Hampshire. We have some great things like hand-marked paper ballots and same-day registration, but many, many other states have online voter registration. And, you know, some of these modernizations, which we may be hearing about next, they're not radical. So people have coped with them. So our next two speakers are going to talk specifically about New Hampshire in relation to the For the People Act and voting rights and election reforms. The Honorable Melanie Levesque served as the New Hampshire State Senator for District 12, which is Nashua to Rindge, from 2018 to 2020, and she chaired the Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee. As a state representative from 2006 to 2010, and from 2012 to 2014, she was a member of the House Election Law Committee and the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. Melanie has been a tireless advocate for voting rights and particularly election modernization. I've had the great pleasure of getting to know her in my capacity of representing Kent Street Coalition on the New Hampshire Campaign for Voting Rights. Melanie has worked as well on other important issues, such as providing quality public education to all children, which is another great Kent Street interest. And she is president of her own telecommunications consulting firm, TCS of America Enterprises. So on the same panel, we have Representative David Cody, who represents Nashua's Ward 4, and he is a lifelong Nashua resident. So we have Nashua well represented tonight. He was first elected to the legislature in 1982 and was a delegate to the 1984 New Hampshire Constitutional Convention. Representative Cody is currently the Deputy Democratic Leader of the House. He has chaired the House Judiciary Committee and the House Election Law Committee, of which he is at present the ranking Democratic member. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd prefer that Senator Levesque go first with her portion of, we've sort of divided the labor up.
Excellent.
Well, thank you. I just want to say, first of all, thank you, Kiri, and thank you to Kent Street Coalition for all of your work. And thank Congressman Pappas for sponsoring HR1. This is a critical bill. I do have a presentation, so I put my thoughts down on a PowerPoint. So here it goes. Let's see. So as you heard, I was the chair of election law and municipal affairs. And as you probably know, that the voting legislation that we worked on was to modernize our voting process using SMART, the secure, modern, accurate registration technology, to automate our process for eligible voters. We actually toured several states to see how they did it. We also tried to implement ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center database, which now has 30 members around the country. Now, currently, as I understand it, our Secretary of State is selecting just the area states that they would check their database, their voter database. And that leaves a lot of holes, a lot of openings. So having something more robust like ERIC would be a better solution. We advocated for no excuse absentee ballots and having post-election audits and getting money out of politics. These are all things that we advocated for as I was the chair of election law. And all of these components are part of HR1 and SR1. They are best practices. They are working throughout the country, and we should be able to implement them in our state as well. As it was pointed out, in New Hampshire during the 2020 election, we had no excuse absentee ballots due to COVID. But guess what? That meant we had early voting. We had manned drop boxes. We already had same-day registration and paper ballots. All of these part of HR1. So just a couple other things in the For the People Act that I just wanted to bring up is election integrity, which is, it's critical. There are components about Native American voting rights and ensuring that they have voting booths and access to voting. Also, an issue about incarcerated people. When they cast their ballots, typically they cast ballots where they are incarcerated. That is not where they live. And that's something that needs to change as well. For election security, another key point is that there are grants given to municipalities to improve their security and also to promote cybersecurity. I did read, and I thought this was really interesting, using voting machines manufactured in the US. So a component of it could be manufactured in the US, but oftentimes components are sourced from China or Russia. So these are additional things that the For the People Act will do. As I was talking with Brad Cook, wonderful man who's head of the select committee, he talked about how big this was, how voluminous this bill was. This has been reviewed and thought about and worked on for years, and there is a lot to our voting process. So yes, it is huge and it is necessary. So I'm not going to go too much into the pushback or into the misinformation because I believe others will talk about that. But I think it's really important that we push back on the misinformation when we hear it and that we use credible sources, some of those being the Brennan Center for Justice, the congress.gov, just so you can see the bill, as well as commoncause.org. So these are credible sources. And then in closing, I just want to say that voter suppression in 1965 was against people of color in the South. John Lewis and others like him marched and died for our freedom. Now today in 2021, the voter suppression has no bounds. There's no group that is exempt from this, whether you're a person of color or disabled, elderly, or a college student. And something new, if you're a parent who supports public schools, if you support lower taxes, things like vouchers increase taxes. You know, we've had, as mentioned, 43 states are proposing these voter suppression bills. And in a time when we have many voter suppression bills, we have things like HB 544, bills that are putting more responsibility for taxes on the average taxpayer. We need to have the federal level act. And that's why it's so important that we pass HR1 S1. And I just wanted to close my statements with this quote from John Lewis, which I totally love, that John Lewis said that the vote is precious and it is the single most powerful tool in our democratic society, and we must use it. So thank you. And I will yield to Deputy Cody, who I am very proud to be sharing this segment with.
Many thanks to you, Senator. And first of all, I'd like to thank Kent Street, because as a member of the sometimes embattled Democrats on the Election Law Committee, we appreciate the support that we've gotten from your members, and the strong advocacy that we've also received. And so thank you very much for that. I was thinking a lot about what I would talk about tonight, because I figured if you're going to have a congressman there and you want to talk about federal legislation, you probably don't want me to talk about the federal legislation necessarily. And if you have Melanie Levesque there, you don't need necessarily to talk about the stuff we've been trying to do for the last few years. So what was it that I was going to talk about? And I think I'm going to talk about, in short, the atmosphere in the legislature today, and the extent to which the Republican Party in the state of New Hampshire is afraid of the adoption of this federal legislation. And unfortunately, we are in a situation at the present time where we are seeing legislation of a sort that I never thought I would see sponsored in New Hampshire. It's would have been more appropriate in the South in the pre-Civil War period. And I want to talk specifically about a bill, the title of which is Senate Bill 89. Senate Bill 89 was originally an omnibus bill that had several parts that I think it would be fair to call them non-controversial in their original form, that dealt with small aspects of election law improvements. It was sufficiently non-controversial that I believe it passed the Senate unanimously in its original form. And it came to us and we were looking at it. I think we had made preliminary decision that it looked as though it was acceptable, and we were going to have a work session on it. And the morning of the work session, we were shown an amendment that we had not seen before. And this is the text of the amendment. And I'll read it in full. Notwithstanding the adoption by the United States Congress of S1, also known as the For the People Act of 2021, all procedures and requirements relating to elections pursuant to the New Hampshire Constitution and as prescribed by New Hampshire law shall remain in full force and effect for all state and county officers, including but not limited to those procedures and requirements relating to voter eligibility, voter registration, absentee voting, conducting the vote, and counting of votes, end quote. As you might imagine, the adoption of that amendment made that tiny little bill very controversial very quickly. And the Democrats on the committee unanimously opposed that amendment because we believe it to be A, contrary to the United States Constitution, B, there was no fiscal note telling us how much money it would cost the state of New Hampshire to have a separate election system for federal and state elections. There was no real answer from the Secretary of State's office about how this would affect New Hampshire elections. And ultimately what happened is there was a party line vote to adopt the amendment. There was a party line vote to pass the amended bill. The bill's gone to the floor, and I understand today that the New Hampshire Senate on a party line vote voted to adopt the House report, and so the bill will be going to the governor. I don't think I need to tell anybody here what the effect of passing a law with that kind of language in it would have. We don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know what a burden it's going to put on local election officials. We basically don't know anything except that this is the first time in my almost 40 years of legislative life that I have seen language that appears to me that it would be very comfortable had it been sponsored by John Calhoun in the 1850s in terms of ignoring the supremacy clause of the US Constitution. I understand that the question came up of how Congress would enforce the For the People Act. The answer is that Section 5 of the 14th Amendment provides that Congress has appropriate legislative authority to enforce violations of the 14th and 15th Amendment, which involve equal protection and voting rights in this context. That was the basis for the ability of Congress to enact civil rights legislation in the 1960s. So I want all of you who can hear me to contact the governor's office and urge him to veto that bill, should you feel that that's necessary. And for those of you who would like to take a look at what the work session on SB 89 was like, I would encourage you to search YouTube. If I can get the link, I'll find it and put it in the chat before we're finished. I want to impress on all of you how significant it is to have a state pass that kind of language in this kind of context. So think about how upset people are with the idea of everyone in New Hampshire who is eligible to vote voting, that they're going to this extent. I want you all to think about that. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and take any questions.
Thank you, Representative Cuddy. Thank you, Melanie. Those were just really fascinating assessments of where we're at in New Hampshire, and that's a great suggestion to, if you guys want to see how, as Representative Cody said, the Republicans are going bananas about HR1 or For the People Act. If you watch that, we'll put that link to that YouTube of the hearing in the follow-up email, so you all can.
And by the way, I should have added the fact that most of the hearing was taken up by Republican members of the committee, wondering why Senator Hassan did not make herself available to explain everything that the Republicans thought was wrong with the legislation. I would also add that the legislative process concerning those bills was at that time not concluded. So it probably was a better idea for them to contact her and deal with what they thought specifically were their concerns, rather than make it into a political football, which essentially is what they did. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, I think there was a lot of objections that and a lot of questioning. Did Senator Sheen call you? No. Did Senator Hassan call you? No. As opposed to, I think a lot of people said back to them, this would be a good opportunity for you to call your senators in Washington and participate in the markup of this bill. Yep. So I will not digress further there. Thank you both so much. We're going to hold questions till the end of the next panel. If hopefully you guys can stick around.
Yep.
Thank you. Panel 3. The next pair of speakers will address some of the myths and misinformation that the people of New Hampshire have been subjected to around the For the People Act. And it has been furious, I would just say. There's been a lot of it. Kelsey Clementowicz is an attorney who almost single-handedly developed the NHDP's voter protection program for the 2020 election. She created the NHDP's terrific website that helped so many voters navigate the strange and confusing world of voting during the COVID-19 pandemic. She also developed the voter assistance hotline, which was which was an invaluable resource for the many people who needed information about anything and everything voting related. Kelsey was also instrumental in crafting the legislation passed in 2020 that permitted all New Hampshire voters who feared COVID infection to vote by absentee ballot. She has done voting rights work in Georgia, Wisconsin, and Texas, which is quite a troika, and is a member of the New Hampshire Voting Rights Coalition. She is currently assisting Fair Fight Action in their advocacy work in support of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and for the People Act. With Kelsey, we have Lucas Meyer, who is a longtime friend of Kent Street Coalition, and I am delighted to welcome him back this evening. Lucas is the founder of Catalyst Advocacy, and he has considerable expertise in advocacy and electoral work. He has run several successful campaigns and advocacy coalitions in New Hampshire, including, especially, Congressman Chris Pappas' re-election in 2020, and also the New Hampshire Campaign for Voting Rights and Fair Maps Coalition. So thank you guys for coming. I'm so happy that you're here. And it's over to you, Lucas and Kelsey.
Great, thank you so much, Carrie. And I also want to shout out Louise and Carrie and a handful of other people on this call who helped us staff that voter assistance hotline, as well as the other work that the voter protection team did. I have a presentation here, so let me get this up. Perfect. All right.
Kelsey, I know people will ask, so I'll just quickly jump in. Will you make this available so we can send it out?
We will.
Okay, thanks so much.
Perfect. So Lucas and I are going to focus on the elements of HR1 that deal with sort of the nuts and bolts of voting in New Hampshire and the misinformation and the myths that are around it. So our plan is, first, we're going to go through some of the big anti-HR1 talking points, bust some myths. Then we'll go through some sort of other things you'll hear, what about this, what about that, and talk about why they're wrong and what's really going on. And then we'll do Q&A at the end. And there were a couple of questions in the chat that I'm excited to get to. So Lucas, I'm gonna throw this one to you. Myth number one, the For the People Act, also HR1 or S1, is a federal takeover of New Hampshire's elections. Lucas, true, not true?
Good evening, everyone. And before I jump into that, I just want to give a shout out to Senator LeVake, and I still refer to him as Chairman Cody, and he will always be my chairman, and Chairman LeVake, Chairwoman LeVake as well. But I just want to first start by just thanking them for all their leadership over the years. Without champions like them in the legislature, none of this work is possible. Is it better if I lean in closer? Is that better? Perfect. Sorry. I usually lean in. I'm pretty intense, so I try not to get too close. So this first myth of a takeover of New Hampshire elections, what you'll often hear is that this is a Pelosi takeover of our elections. This is ridiculous. We have passed federal voting rights legislation in this country before. We can do it again. This is not a problem. Am I mute? Is my connection okay? Okay, I get a little anxious sometime in Ward 2 Manchester. Now, you remember the Help America Vote Act, HAVA. We talk about HAVA funds. That was a big federal bill that helped states. The HR1 S1, that is a floor, a federal standard for all states. This is not a federal takeover. This will still be elections run by the states, but we're setting minimum standards to protect our democracy. Done.
Perfect. And the congressman mentioned this too, but it's in the US Constitution, both the elections clause and what we call the supremacy clause, which says that federal law supersedes or preempts any state law. And so that's been done around federal elections for years, including the extremely important 1965 Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, which basically meant that all of the really racist bad things in, say, the Mississippi Constitution and other states' constitutions got thrown out. Right? This made them illegal. So let's jump over to the partisan power grab. Oh, Lucas, this one's yours too.
So I can't even. Look, this is not a partisan power grab. This is often a conversation we have when we talk about a healthy democracy, that sometimes it becomes partisan. One, it's a sad state of affairs in our country that one party just does not believe in a representative democracy and is systemically working to undermine our democracy. So this is not a partisan power grab. This is protecting our democracy. This is enfranchising not just Democratic voters, this is enfranchising voters of every affiliation, right? We saw in New Hampshire, I believe Chairwoman LeVake was talking about this with when we expanded access to absentee ballots. Everyone benefited from that. Online voter registration, automatic voter registration. Some studies have even found that automatic voter registration really helps rural voters, which, usually benefits Republicans. So this also gets to some of the roots of why we get so frustrated, is that this isn't about party politics. This is about what it means to have free and fair elections. There is nothing partisan power grabby about independent redistricting. Pretty much the opposite.
How do you really feel, Lucas?
Oh my God, I'm worked up today, folks.
Perfect. All right, myth number 3, the For the People Act will open the door to voter fraud. This we've heard over and over again, despite there being absolutely no evidence that any of these reforms would increase voter fraud. In fact, last year, the New Hampshire Superior Court, Judge Anderson, found that voter fraud in New Hampshire was exceedingly rare and virtually non-existent. That's true in New Hampshire, and it's actually true nationwide. So many states already offer some of these pro-voter provisions in HR1, and as they've increased access, we've seen no uptick in voter fraud. Sometimes you'll hear, especially, I believe that Deputy Scanlon often refers to the North Carolina ballot harvesting case. And oh my gosh, if we let more people vote absentee, or we let, their next door neighbor drop off their absentee ballot for them, it's going to lead to ballot harvesting and fraud. Just look at North Carolina. Well, let's do that. Let's take a look at North Carolina. So this was the North Carolina 9th Congressional District in 2018. And there was an evangelical pastor named Mark Harris, who was running for that seat. And when the votes came in, it looked like he won by less than 1,000 votes. However, the Board of Elections looked back and something looked funny. And so they voted unanimously to throw out those results and look into it. And it turns out that these Republican operatives, what they were doing was encouraging people to request absentee ballots and then going door to door and convincing people totally illegally to give them their ballots. And then they were changing their ballots, voting for the Republican and turning them in. At that time, that was a felony in North Carolina. In fact, it was a lot of felonies. Just taking control of a ballot that is not your family member or your somebody for whom you're the legal guardian, that was a felony in North Carolina. Their law is actually more restrictive than New Hampshire's current law. It didn't stop these people because they intentionally and knowingly just scoffed all of the laws, and now they're in prison and felons. And so when we talk about allowing these sort of, really basic ways to help voters, and then you talk about one totally crazy case of somebody who just was a criminal and didn't care what the law said because they were going to violate it left and right. It's a little ridiculous. It's something like 0.0001% of all votes have even a question of fraud in them. All right. Lucas, will this affect the first in the nation primary?
I can't even, folks. I swear, I can't even. No, look, absolutely not. The parties dictate the first in the nation primary. They dictate the schedule. The Secretary of State in front of the world could not back up his claim here. It's totally false. He's even admitted it in so many words. This has absolutely nothing to do with the first in the nation primary. If anyone even brings it up in conversation, dismiss it as an outright lie and move on. It has literally nothing to do with the first in the nation primary.
Great. Some people say that the For the People Act would eliminate voter ID requirements. It doesn't. New Hampshire's voter ID law perfectly complies with HR1. What it says is that restrictive voter ID laws that prevent people from actually being able to cast a vote, that those people need to be allowed the opportunity to do what we do here, to sign an affidavit swearing to their identity. So this is really important in some states where their voter ID laws are really restrictive and disproportionately affect Black voters, Indigenous voters, and other people of color. So like, for example, in Arizona, they require you to have a federal ID, but they have a large Native American population who live on reservations that are far from any DMV. And yet they won't allow the tribal IDs in order to vote. And their addresses are often non-conforming because reservations have a different system, and so even those who drive 5 to 10 hours in order to get IDs can't. So this section specifically requires other states who are stopping people from vote to doing what New Hampshire already does: let people swear to it. All right, Lucas, let's talk about the cost. I know we've heard our Secretary of State object to HR1 mostly because it would be expensive and hard for local elections officials. What's the truth?
So actually, in HR1, they have included expanded HAVA funding, HAVA being Help America Vote Act money. Some of you might be familiar in this, in that New Hampshire is one of the few states in the country that has clutched onto our HAVA money from 2002. In fact, at last accounting, which is always very difficult with our Secretary of State, he is sitting on at least $11 million of HAVA money into the state, just sitting in a bank account, just waiting. Not helping Americans vote, sitting in a bank account, accruing interest. HR1 would release additional funds to our local towns, to our state, to help pay for some of these additional reforms to enfranchise voters. And this also gets to part of the root of why they oppose this so much. When Bill Gardner got elected Secretary of State in 1706, our elections have not changed since then. Since he has been Secretary of State, he has not done the reforms, the housekeeping, the basic modernization reforms that our state needs. So the fact that we don't have OVR, that we don't have AVR, I'm sorry, I'm using acronyms, online voter registration, automatic voter registration, e-poll books, since we have been so draconian and archaic in our progress, this is a leap for our state. It shouldn't have to be, and it needs to be, but that is where some of that root comes from, because our Secretary of State has been asleep at the wheel, because they haven't listened to the wisdom of Representative Cody and the Honorable Melanie LeVake, who try to get these things done. So don't listen to that stuff. The federal government will give us additional money, and even worse, real quick, news from today, SB 89, you want to talk about costs to our cities? How about running 2 separate elections on the same day without a fiscal note on the bill? Don't come talk to me about funding when you are sending an unfunded mandate to our towns and cities to run 2 elections on the same day. Get that out of here.
Cutting off their noses to spite their faces. Oh, and we had a question about the constitutionality about SB 89. And you're right, it is probably not constitutional. It would need to pass and have HR1 pass, and at least in order for a lawsuit to be filed. There are certainly quite a few grounds in order to do so, but we will see how that all shakes out. Okay, so we're going to shift a little bit to talk. We're going to get a little into some nuts and bolts in order to go through some of the other claims here. So, what about the New Hampshire Constitution? We have heard Deputy Scanlon and others say that the New Hampshire Constitution forbids no excuse absentee voting or early voting. First and foremost, Article 11 of the New Hampshire Constitution, totally open to interpretation. You can argue it whichever way you want in order to achieve your goal here. It hasn't been litigated, but it basically says that the general court, the legislature, must allow absent or disabled voters to cast an absentee ballot. But New Hampshire has actually expanded absentee voting, as you all know, beyond this multiple times, expanded it to allow anybody who needs to go to work, who needs to take care of children, who has a religious issue. And of course, in 2020, we saw them redefine, oh, well, disability includes any concern about COVID-19, which meant that we had no excuse absentee voting in 2020, and people loved it. Any voter could cast their absentee ballot, and they could do so in person too. So when we talk about early voting here, we're talking about what so many voters already do, which if they know they're going to be out of town or at work, or if they were concerned about COVID, they could go into their clerk's office as soon as ballots are ready, which is usually 30 to 45 days before the election, whenever they're open, and cast their ballots. This formalizes that and says that you don't need an excuse, which means that anybody can go in and have more options. But regardless of whether or not you think that the New Hampshire Constitution, allows this or would prevent this, it doesn't matter because HR1 settles the debate. Remember when we talked about the US Constitution and preemption and how Congress shall make laws around the elections? Well, HR1 does that and says, great, debate is over. We can do no excuse and anybody can vote early as long as the ballots are available. What's really going on with this, Lucas?
Oh, sorry. No, you nailed it, counselor. I got nothing. I got nothing to add on that.
Cool. I was just going to note that voters loved having these options in 2020. We saw record turnout all time, despite the pandemic and everything going on in 2020. Yeah, again, our opponents will use this constitutional argument for this, despite not having any problem with it when we're expanding absentee voting to people in jail or people who are need to take care of their kids. All right, let's talk about the checklist. All right, so we have heard, oh, HR1 would make the checklist. It would be really hard to maintain it. And what, we're letting 16-year-olds vote now? What is all of this? We can't do this. Lucas, could you just give us a quick primer on OVR, online voter registration, and AVR, and what this actually does?
Sometimes it can be exhausting in the state. So look, accuracy of our voter checklist will unequivocally improve if we have online voter registration and automatic voter registration. Think about it. With automatic voter registration, and when we worked on SMART, the Secure, Modern, Accurate Registration Technology Act, our AVR, our very thorough AVR proposal that the Honorable Melanie LeVake worked really hard on. If we just have this connected to our DMV and then eventually build it out to all of our other government agencies, that automatically updates your voter registration. So when you go and fill out, whether it's maybe an unemployment check or you're updating your license or you're interacting with literally any government entity and you're putting in your address, that information, and your voter registration automatically updates, that is going to provide more accurate, clean voter rolls. Online voter registration. Why is that important? Everybody uses technology these days. We all can take pictures of checks and all of a sudden it appears in our bank account. If we can do that, we can very much do online voter registration. A lot of states have done online voter registration, and that ease of access of information will improve the accuracy of our checklist. New Hampshire, we update our voter checklist once every 10 years. That means Lucas Meyer is on the voter rolls in Concord Ward 10, in Manchester Ward 3, and Manchester Ward 2. That is not super convenient for our local election officials to have these bloated voter rolls with folks who have moved around. Now, if anyone knows me, and we don't have enough time to get fully into ERIC, but ERIC would solve a lot of these problems. ERIC stands for the Electronic Registration Information Center. I won't get into it too much, but basically it would help a lot with keeping our registration information up to date and make our local election officials' job much easier. And on election day, they wouldn't have a lot of extra information that they would have to look through. They would have accurate voter lists. And again, to circle back to the news of today, if you want to see a local election official's head explode, have them manage 2 voter checklists on the same day. That is what Republicans are pushing for in this state if HR1 is to pass. So accuracy of voter checklists, implementing these modernization reforms will only improve that. And if our Secretary of State decided to do his job and maybe get us into Eric, that would improve it even further.
What, Lucas, you don't think that supervisors of the checklist and clerks like spending most of their time doing data entry and typing in all of this information that voters could just give them, and then dealing with a typo or a misstatement and showing someone's not registered? That seems crazy.
Heaven forbid we enter the 21st century in our elections.
And speaking of the 16-year-old issue with automatic voter registration, you know, when you go to the DMV to get your license for the first time, unless you opt out, you would be setting yourself up, you would be pre-registered to vote so that when you turn 18, you will be registered to vote. You're not registered at 16, you can't vote until you're 18. This doesn't change that. And we did get him started about Eric. All right, we have heard a little bit of misinformation about drop boxes and postage and absentee ballots or applications being sent to everyone. I believe this is a Representative Griffin's argument where she had said that, oh no, there was a court ruling saying that New Hampshire doesn't need to allow drop boxes or postage or absentee ballot applications to everyone. So she's right. Under the old law, it wasn't required. What she's talking about is a case where a bunch of voters were like, hey, there's COVID. In COVID, to protect our right to vote, the state should do all of this. And the court was like, well, it's not really required by the Constitution. There's nothing in the law that does it. This now creates a law that would do it, would mean that voters have access to drop boxes 45 days before the election to drop off their applications or their completed absentee ballots. Everyone who is registered and registered accurately now would be mailed an absentee ballot application, not the ballot, an application, so that if they chose to, they could request an absentee ballot. And it would pay for postage so that voters, especially those who might have mobility issues, don't have to, go find stamps and envelopes. It would have prepaid envelopes to turn back. And in fact, all of these options were something that the 2020 Secretary of State's Commission, that the Secretary of State handpicked, they actually recommended that New Hampshire adopt all of this in 2020. But what's great about HR1 is that these would actually be required. Voters want this, and again, would help with the funding of it.
Kelsey, I'm just gonna jump in real quick. Into the chat box, I'm dropping a link. This is to a Google Doc that explains some of the changes that have been made in markup. And markup is essentially when they're working on the bill, they make amendments to it, they update it. And as Kelsey talks through these next couple slides, she's going to talk about some of the changes that have been made to the bill that are directly a result of concerns that local election officials have raised about essentially the manageability of small towns being able to do some of these bigger ideas, where maybe a town of 500 people doesn't need to be open 14 days ahead of an election, 8 hours a day, when they have a local election official staff that is pretty lean and volunteer. So there's a Google Doc in there. I can make sure Luis and Kiri have it to distribute to everyone later, but feel free to use that and reference it as Kelsey continues throughout the presentation.
Great, thanks. And to Janet's specific question, I don't believe it removed it, but I could be wrong about that. What I will say though is that sending out applications and having those prepaid envelopes is something that can be done at the state level. The Secretary of State's office can send those all out, and actually the Select Committee also recommended that they use an election mail specialist to make it really efficient and really reduce costs for voters, cost per voter for the state. And in addition, for secure drop boxes, most, or at least many clerk's offices have secure drop boxes already where people can, pay their parking tickets, drop things off. All right, let's jump over to 2 weeks of early voting. So the very first version of HR1 required that all voting jurisdictions be open for 15 consecutive days of early voting before the election. And we heard a lot of pushback saying that, we can't do this. Small towns don't have the resources. In the markup, and I know that our senators were pretty vocal and pretty central in this. They made some changes here, which include that any jurisdiction with less than 3,000 registered voters does not need to have 15 days of early voting. As long as make it available on one Saturday or one Sunday for the day, that will accomplish it for any place with less than 3,000 registered voters. Although in New Hampshire, that's about 2/3 of our jurisdictions when I was looking through a brief list. And so let's talk about the bigger places. So these bigger places already have clerk's offices that are open during business hours. And actually our current law in New Hampshire says that when they're open during business hours, voters have to be allowed to come in and request and cast their absentee ballot. So people were voting in New Hampshire in 2020 as soon as ballots were available, which was about a month before the election. So in fact, most of these locations already had far more than 15 days of early voting. This does require them to be open on the weekend before the election, which actually we saw a lot of places doing pre-processing at that point anyway. But I just want to shout out the local elections officials who just really did an amazing job in 2020 in making this accessible to so many voters so that, people didn't have to have big crowds on election days. And when you look at New Hampshire law also, it says that, the clerk could designate somebody. It could be a deputy clerk. It could be the moderator, the supervisors of the checklist who are hosting these sessions. As well as I know the League of Women Voters was really, really instrumental at providing volunteers for a lot of these locations. Nashua opened a satellite location, first at the library and then in another building so that they could have this option for voters. And so this sounds like a huge sticker shock, but this is something that we're already doing. And again, that led to us having our all-time highest turnout in 2020. And just as a note, weekend and evening voting hours have been shown over and over and over again to improve turnout for lower income and minority voters, which is one of the primary reasons that this is in the bill. And it's been a big fight in Georgia. Lucas, anything to add on this one?
No, there was a question by Rep. Schuett about HAVA costs associated with this. I'd have to check the EAC Election Administration Commission guidance on this. I know you can use that to implement a lot of the reforms. I'm not entirely sure how it would work with reimbursing local election officials. My guess is like maybe. But it should be.
Yeah, no, we saw that actually with the CARES Act funding in 2020. The Secretary of State's office basically hired an accounting firm to, keep an eye on how much they would give each locality in order to reimburse. And that did include having to pay additional staff. It's just going to be a question of, how much money and where it's allocated. Ooh, this one. New Hampshire's turnout is good, even great. Why in the world would we want to change anything? Why would we want to make voting easier? In fact, our Secretary of State argued at a congressional hearing for the NVRA, quote, "Why should the 80% of the eligible voters in New Hampshire who have made the effort to register spend their tax dollars on the 20% who have not done so?" Okay, so New Hampshire does have good turnout. In 2020, it was 75.5%. New Hampshire has a culture of engaging with our democracy. We've got close elections, right? It draws voters to the polls. And as I've said a couple of times, New Hampshire had record turnout in 2020, but we were surpassed. We were surpassed by Minnesota, Colorado, Maine, Wisconsin, Washington, and Oregon. And How many of those had close elections that drew people to the polls? About half of them, but the rest of them had really accessible elections. They had online voter registration. They had absentee voting for everyone. It was easier to vote there. And sort of going back to my rage bubble at the quote that the Secretary of State had made, and that continues to be part of their argument. Well, if it's easy for some people, why would we want to make it easier for others? So yeah, for many Granite Staters, people especially who are established, they've been in the same place for a while, they're able-bodied, they're white, they have resources, voting is easy. But you talk to people who have naturalized in New Hampshire or have a Spanish accent, who are asked for their birth certificates and their naturalization dates. You talk to people for whom supervisors of the checklist have done independent investigations into their LinkedIns and thrown out their registrations because they believe they must be lying when they swear that they live there. These are the voters that matter. These are the voters that make up our community. Like, we can't. Sorry. This just, it makes my head explode. I mean, we talk about these voters who are really our historically underrepresented voters. And that's who these reforms at its core are aimed at, right? This is a racial justice bill. This is a voting justice bill. And, you know, like, that's just, it's just not the concern of people who oppose this. You know, the same people who oppose this bill also advocated for SB3, which the court found burdened voters unconstitutionally and it disproportionately made it extremely hard for voters who didn't have a stable address, who were homeless, who were young, who were people of color to vote. And that's who our elections need to be able to reach. Everyone needs a voice. Lucas?
Yeah, I mean, this is our last slide, right? This is the end. And look, as you can tell, we are passionate about this. I get very angry, and I get angry because our future is fundamentally on the line. I am genuinely concerned about the future of our democracy. I am genuinely concerned about our ability to get anything done in this country if we do not pass HR1 before the People Act. I am mad. I am furious. But that is what gets me out of bed in the morning, because if I stop being mad and I get sad, I get hopeless. We cannot be hopeless, okay? I don't care what Senator Manchin does over the next month. Obviously, I do care, but we control what we control. And what is that? That is talking to every God-blessed person we know and jacking up the pressure, jacking up the urgency. I don't know what we're going to do if we don't pass this. I'll organize the hell out of the state. I'll do whatever I can do, but we have to work as a collective. We have to honor the work of Chairwoman LeVake. We have to honor the work of Chairman Cody and all of our folks in the legislature who are grinding to get this done and running into roadblocks. We have to thank people like Kelsey Clementowicz who do voter protection, Kyrie Claflin who does local election work. This is an all hands on deck moment, folks. I cannot implore you enough. I know there are a lot of terrible things happening. What's happening to the budget is awful. An abortion ban in New Hampshire is something I cannot believe is about to be signed into law. But you want to know what's going to be really terrible? When they have rigged our democracy against each and every one of us, so every election cycle they can walk into a legislature full of conservative Republicans who are running in primaries and don't have to talk to voters in the middle. And every time we go to a legislative session, we will be playing on a playing field that is not fair. So this is it, folks. This is the fight for the next however goddamn long it takes. And I commit, and Kelsey commits, and I know all of you are committed to this fight, because if any of us start to waver, start to get the shakes, start to get a little, So, someone told to me, I'm sorry, I got it real quick. Someone told me today that HR1 is dead on arrival. I have never been so mad in my life that someone would talk to me like that someone would poke a hole in my hope for the future like that. It is not dead on arrival. We heard today, and I'm sorry, Kiri, if you already said this, but we heard today from our folks at ECU and LAV and Citizens United, Let America Vote, that the Senate President, Chuck Schumer, referenced New Hampshire as the state leading the way in the fight to pass HR1. Your work matters. People see it. The question is, what are you going to do? What are you going to give up? What capital are you going to expend? I'm going to leave it all out there. I'm going to grind it out. You'll find me at the bottom of the Merrimack one of these days. I will have run my tread done, and I will be glad. So please, this is it. I cannot implore you enough. Thank you for all the work you've done. This doesn't work without you. So I thank you very much. I'm sorry for getting all mad and stuff, but goddamn, folks, this is it. So I appreciate all your work. I appreciate the hell out of Kent Street Coalition. I wish we could be at a library together, hanging out, maybe someday soon, but I love you all very much, and I appreciate you letting me rant at you for a bit.
Thank you, Lucas. You can rant at us anytime. I think I don't know about you, I'm electrified after those two panels and have so many ideas and have so much I want to talk to you guys about. But I will get to action items that you guys can do in the next week. So there's a way to channel the anger or your anxiety. But first we're gonna go to questions, and Louise is going to ask some of those.
Thanks, Kiri, and thank you, Lucas. That was the inspiration I need, as always, coming from you. And then, Kelsey and Senator LeVake and Chairman Cody, just knowing that you all are in this fight, it's just gives me so much courage to keep moving forward. Cannot thank you enough, and for sharing all your wisdom and knowledge tonight. It's astounding to me, and you really lead the way here in New Hampshire. I do have, there are a few questions that have come up. One is, can you just speak a bit about the impact on redistricting that HR1 would have? Because I think people don't fully understand that it would apply to federal elections and not necessarily to what's going on here in the state. So I open that up to the panelists to give us a little perspective on that, and if there's anything about HR1 that can help us address the challenges we have here on redistricting.
I'd have to double check. I'm pretty sure the independent redistricting commissions that they have for the congressional seats, my brain is telling me that doesn't go into effect until after our redistricting.
That's what I remember also.
Okay.
So either we're both right or we're both wrong.
And it would apply only to the congressional districts, correct? And not to our state house redistricting that's going on.
No, that's all state level, and that'll all be for folks' context, because we're going to be calling on y'all a lot for help on this. This is going to be a process fight.
Okay.
This is going to be all about the public raising pressure onto the members of these special redistricting committees, one in the House, one in the Senate, and it's just going to have to be turning out as many people as we have. We don't have any levers of power on the committee. We have 7 Democrats on the House Special Redistricting Committee who are excellent. A round of applause for House leadership for picking a very good team to be on that committee. The Senate has not moved forward yet with what their process will be, which is red flag number 1, that they haven't outlined that process yet. So as this kicks off and they presumably or hopefully have started holding public hearings, we have to be inundating it with testimony, with emails, with calls, with showing up in person. It's going to be a total, not to use a cliche, people-powered campaign. But guess what, folks? The people are on our side. Nobody wants politicians picking who their voters are. It goes the other way. So we got the message. We just got to turn the people out.
And I don't think anybody is sure what effect it would have in the context of Senate Bill 89 as regards redistricting either.
Okay.
So,
And I would point out that we have Diane Schuett, Representative Diane Schuett, on the in the audience tonight, and Diane Schuett has worked very long and hard to try to fight for independent redistricting in New Hampshire. We also had Kate Corvo, I think she's dropped off, but from America Votes, another voting rights champion, and Olivia Zink as well. So we're really lucky in the state to have so many talented people working on these issues. But one of the things we've seen is that we have a Secretary of State, as we know, who, along with the Deputy Secretary of State, Scanlon, who have openly supported SB 89 and opposed the For the People Act, specifically putting that out there to the public, but I think even more significantly, going directly to election officials and speaking to them with their concerns about the For the People Act and the way it might, in their opinion, negatively impact New Hampshire. So do you have ideas about how we might counter some of this misinformation with election officials? Should we reach out to our own election officials? Are there any steps that we can take to try to counter that effort that that the Secretary of State's office has been engaged in?
more communication is never a bad idea.
Okay.
I would, what's the saying? Assumptions make an ass of you and me. I assumed incorrectly that a lot of the information would get to folks about the changes that have been made to HR1. Assume people know nothing. I had seen and this is within the family here, I know we're recording it, but I am working, our team is working on putting on a briefing. So we remember Secretary of State did his sham, partisan briefing on HR1. Again, keep within the family here because it's not totally locked in yet, but we are planning on doing a official briefing run through the delegation with Natalie Tennant, who's the former West Virginia Secretary of State. So, Chairwoman LeVake remembers her. She was super helpful. She's awesome. She's back in the game. It's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bummer she lost her race for Secretary of State again, but she's going to come help us out because she's been doing a lot of this in West Virginia, a lot of the same size towns. So we are working to get this information out there, but that Google Doc I put in, send that to your town administrator, send that to your town clerk. Say, hey, I got this information. It's reliable. You can fact check it. It's real. Here are some of the updates. I just wanted to make sure you knew. We gave it to the Clerks Association. We've given it to the Municipal Association. But again, just spread the word. Spread the word.
Great. And always remember, you can run to be an election official too. So make a point of looking to see if your town needs it. Senator LeVake, go right ahead.
Thank you. I love the idea of talking with your election officials. And Kelsey, I put a little bug in your little message out to you. What a great information about the misinformation. And it would make a great 1-pager or 2-pager to hand out and give to them and to start a dialogue.
Great.
It's a great idea.
And Senator, I know that when you were chair of the Senate Election Law Committee, that you invited, often you were on the, I'm forgetting the name of the national organization for legislators, but you were on the, have you followed where they stand on HR1 for the People Act? Have they taken a position or put out any talking points about it?
Well, NCSL wouldn't take a position on it, but I'm sure they have information on it, which I take a look at.
Okay, great. Yeah, you did a great job of reaching out beyond New Hampshire in terms of those visits you made to other states And then in terms of that sort of outreach. So however we can build those connections is important too. One other question that came up is we've seen we're hearing about in some other states, changes to the laws that impact the way elections are certified in states. Will the For the People Act, does it say anything about that? And are we at all at risk here in New Hampshire for that sort of approach being introduced?
Louise, one more time. Oh, no, you got it, Lucas.
No, I was going to ask the same thing. What was happening in other states?
Oh, what's happening in other states is they're changing who has the power to certify or decertify elections.
Yeah, that shit's crazy.
And so, and we're hearing about some of those laws going into effect. I'm wondering if if the For the People Act addresses that or at all. And the second part of that question is, have we seen any efforts to that effect here in New Hampshire?
I will take a look at the For the People Act and see if there are any provisions in that, but not to my knowledge. I know it does include provisions like you can't have challenges within a certain amount of the period of time before the election, because that'll stop things up. What I will say is that in other states, generally there's an existing significant process for certifying the elections that generally happens at the county levels. So for example, in Wisconsin, they take all of the results from the machines and the counts and the hand counts, and then they reconcile those at an additional meeting. That's generally done at the county level, and then it's certified up. In New Hampshire, we don't have any of that. It's just that we send them to the SOS and they certify them. You know, the one exception we had to that was the Wyndham audit. But again, most other states already have a process for that. And again, they're sort of hijacking that process to partisan committees. Lucas, have we seen that?
No, but I think that is it's a great question and emblematic of why politicians are opposing this bill, right? This, when they talk about a federal power grab, that's just projecting, right? This is about them trying to bypass every means of our democracy to hold on to their waning power, right? This is not, they are losing control of power because our country is changing for the better and people are voting. And when people vote, Democrats win because we like people and we take care of people and we're compassionate and we have really good ideas. So instead of, you know, like growing up and evolving as a party, they are trying to do whatever they can to grab that power. And that is what you're seeing in other states. I'm not going to say that's not possible here, right? Like, we've seen in the past 4 years, people in power can just start doing whatever they want, and it's up to the people to be able to hold them accountable. So I'm not going to say it's not possible here, but you'll find me on the front line of that protest for damn sure.
Well, and to Renia's question, it's not that they necessarily have the power to change the elections, but what they have the power to do is to undermine confidence in the elections. And that's what we've been seeing. And we've seen, you know, some of that here, but it's all sort of new examples of the big lie. And, you know, I'm certainly concerned about the continued effect of the lack of confidence, especially going into the next presidential cycle.
And that's, and sorry, I know we're like, we can talk about this for hours, but it's an important point as we head into the next legislative session, because Representative Barry, who is a Republican hack on election law, keeps citing, well, St. A's poll says this many people in New Hampshire don't have faith in our elections. I'm like, yeah, dude, because you're out there saying there's voter fraud and doing everything you can to undermine that confidence in elections. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
So they will use that justification, just like they use lies of voter fraud, to pass measures to further grip onto their waning power.
Well, thank you. I think that this program has definitely given us the why and, you know, the importance, and some of the has educated us so that we can get out there and talk about this. And we're going to turn to Kiri now to give us some action steps that we can take. and hoping that everyone here, you know, one thing I'm really proud of Kent Street around voting rights from the get-go. This has always been a really key issue. And so I have great confidence in folks as we're talking tonight that I know people will take action, but we'll hear from Kiri about what some of those specific steps can be.
Thanks, Louise. Thank you to our panelists. That was just so interesting and so stimulating. And that just is so great now that I have all the work that you've done, Kelsey and Lucas, on the myth busting that I was supposed to do, but you've now done it. So I'm really grateful. Thank you. It pays to be procrastinating sometimes. Okay, so sorry. So quickly, I'm going to say 4 things that you can do in the next week. Monday night, Stacey Abrams, the former Democratic candidate for governor of Georgia and all around voting rights hero, and her organization Fair Fight Action are kicking off a nationwide texting campaign to rally young voters of color to support the For the People Act. And this is a quote from Stacey Abrams, make sure that every US senator is hearing from their constituents about the urgent need to pass this legislation. I will put that link in the chat in a second. This is a town hall. It's a virtual event. And so I hope you will all sign up to see who the special secret guest is on the first night. Maybe you can guess. That's 8 to 9 on Monday, June 14th. Second, there is a phone bank next Tuesday evening. And I think Lucas has put this in the chat, and we'll also include this in the recap email. It's sponsored by End Citizens United, Let America Vote, and the New Hampshire Campaign for Voting Rights, starting at 6:15. The phone bank, you will be calling Democratic voters, so friendlies, no one probably is going to yell at you, and you'll patch them through to call Senator Shaheen and Hassan to thank them for their support for the For the People Act. And you can tell them whatever you would like to tell them about how you feel about the filibuster, perhaps reform. So yes, so Lucas has put the sign up link in the chat. I get to spill the beans, the special guest on Tuesday to kick off the phone bank is Jason Kander, who is the founder of Let America Vote and a friend of New Hampshire. So we in the Voting Rights Working Group have been writing letters to the editor and op-eds in support of the For the People Act. We would love to have any of you and all of you join us in that effort. I can include talking points in the follow-up email. You'll have the slide decks. And I also have a small library of articles that you can use for background or just geek out on the history of the filibuster. I have that. You're welcome to it. The last thing is what Representative Cody said. Please call and tell everyone you know to call Governor Sununu and ask him to veto SB 89, the bananas amendment that's just 2 election systems. It's crazy. So again, thank you to all of you for coming and for staying to the bitter end here. I really appreciate that. Louise, do you have some final thoughts?
Yes, I just want to really give an extended thanks to Kiri, because this was, you know, Kiri understood the importance of bringing this directly to our membership and conceived of the program, and also reached out to our panelists and invited them to join us tonight. And so we're really lucky, Kiri, to have you helping to guide us and lead us in this effort. I will also shout out to Sally Hatch, who is the convener of our Voting Rights Working Group, and welcome everyone who is interested to join us in that working group. We meet the first and third Wednesdays of every month from 5 to 6:30. It's a great group of people. So please feel free to join us. I see a good number of our members on tonight. And then I'll just also say another thank you to our panelists, not only for being with us tonight, but really you all are out there all the time fighting the good fight on voting and democracy. And Lucas, the words you said, now is the moment. We cannot afford to let up. We have to keep going. We have to keep fighting. But the other part of the message that you conveyed is also important. Don't let people make you get discouraged. We can do this. We must do it to defend our democracy, and we will. And it's by these steps, one by one. They seem, writing a letter to the editor in and of itself isn't the thing that's going to win us our democracy. But when we do that as part of a broader community, when we do that together, when we do that one letter on top of another, one phone call on top of another, that's when we really begin to see change and to see the impact. And I just really believe that together we can, and together we will. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody, not only on our panel, but also everyone who came tonight to participate, because this is what democracy looks like. So thank you. Yes, let's make good trouble. John Lewis, it's all about making good trouble. Use that hashtag now and again when you're on Twitter. Hashtag good trouble.
Good trouble.
So good night, everyone. With that, we'll conclude the evening. So thank you. Thank you, one and all. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, Louise. We love
together.
you. And Carrie, and
Thank you all. Take care. Let's go
Bye.
get them.
Well, yeah, go get them.
Go get them.
Absolutely.
Fight to them.
Did one of you two guys record copy the chat before I cut the recording off?
I've been copying it, but I'll do it again. Yes, it's all set.
Okay, good. I'm going to turn the recording off. Thanks, everybody.
This was great. Thanks, everyone.